I'm Dan Harding. I'm a blacksmith. Well, loosely described as a blacksmith. But generally, I just say I like to make and fix things. And I've got a wonderful workshop that is my dad's workshop that I rent off him, and was my domain as I grew up. And so it's here I learned to weld. Over the past 30 odd years, I suppose, I've filled it with things that I've found that have been interesting or might be useful sometime, or things that I've broken and taken apart and thought are beautiful and might look good as something else at some point. So I'll make stuff out of rubbish and bits of old Volkswagen, particularly Volkswagen, and keep myself generally fairly busy. Growing up and living in Cornwall, which is a poorer part of England, I vowed I was never going to be a blacksmith because didn't seem to be much money in it. However, on exam leave for GCSEs, I had a long summer off and I started running a motorcycle by this point, and needed a certain level of income, and which the work that came into the workshop provided. So I kind of fell into it by default. So although I vowed not to do it, it actually turns out I was alright at it, and I'm quite practical and good with my hands, so I was able to do this work, and I never got around to doing anything else. The concept of the Hotpod came in what I think was a sort of stroke of genius. I used to live in a Volkswagen van, and at the time had plenty of friends who lived in buses and converted vehicles of various sorts, and several of them I noticed heated their vehicles in the winter with gas bottle stoves, and they were very crudely made with like cupboard door hinges, self-tapered on, and very crudely cut doors, but they did work, just not brilliantly. And I thought, I'm a blacksmith, I can actually do a much better job of this. So I did start making wood-burning stoves out of gas bottles, which were sort of upright gas bottles with doors cut in, and they burnt wood beautifully, little hot plates on top, and oddly a Volkswagen engine cylinder as the flue spigot, which has remained a theme throughout. Eventually wanted one for mine and Lucy's first cottage, and I wanted it to burn coal or anthracite in the same way as my parents' Rayburn used to work, so it just keeps running permanently. And I knew that I needed a grate, and a grate across a gas bottle right across the middle didn't work very well. It was dead fuel around the outside and pretty pointless fire in the middle, and I had a brainwave of cutting the top off the gas bottle and sticking it underneath, which gave me a big hot plate, an ashpan drawer, and a small grate with it sort of funneling down to a small grate. And the first three, I think, what I now call pre-pods, were this type of gas bottle stove. The third one had the first glass door. All three of them had very little stubby legs, 3 legs always, I've always made things with 3 legs. The third one had a glass door and sculpted duck's feet. And then we moved into our current house, and I made Lucy a Christmas present, and the creamery down the road had just closed, and there was a wealth of these beautiful stainless steel pipes and tubes and knobs and valves, and I've still got a big crate full. And I took my pickup down and loaded it up with all these stainless bits, and they became what I started using for legs and valves and handles and things on what has now become known as the Hotpod. So in our house is still the pre-pod that all Hotpods are copies of, and still doing sterling work, runs every winter, all winter on coal, and the design had evolved. It's still evolving slightly, but if you look at Lucy's Hotpod and a modern cast iron, this is 12 years later, the cast iron Hotpod Unlimited, at first look it's the same thing. It's only when you actually study the details that you'll see that they're different. An accident of the design of the Hotpod, well, a very happy accident, was that I always wanted to be able to see the fire. So the first Hotpod I made, or pre-pod rather, one with duck's feet, with a glass door, had a Pyrex saucepan lid, a 16cm Pyrex saucepan lid, which when I thought it'd be a good idea, I tested it in a Rayburn, opened all the stops, got the Rayburn burning nicely, and pulled this thing out with some tongs, and it was glowing orange, and in front of my eyes changed shape. So I thought, okay, that's going to be fine. It can clearly cope with the heat. Conventional stoves back in those days, if they had glass, it was always black, and occasionally you get a little red glow from somewhere beyond the blackness of the glass. And I didn't want that, and I'd seen these a modern breed of stoves called Clearview stoves, and I was lucky enough my friends had bought one, so I was like, okay, well, how does this Clearview stove keep the glass clean? And it was to do with the air wash, where you let a lot of air in that washes over the glass, a bit like if your bathroom mirror steams up and you run a hairdryer over it. You know, it stops that condensation, and that's exactly how an air wash works in a stove. So we built a very rudimentary air wash. That means the door tube actually is twin walled, so air comes in a valve and blows around the inside of the door tube where it preheats before coming out of the slot at the top, or in the case of modern ones, 2 slots at the top, and washing over the glass before feeding the fire. And it was almost a success. The first one, it did stay clean always, just in a little stripe down the middle. So I knew I needed to work on the sort of airflow design. When it came to having the Hotpod, the cast iron Hotpod, tested for its efficiency and its European standards rating, it turns out the Hotpod is magnificently efficient, and that is actually down to this secondary air, the air wash, introducing a second source of oxygen to have. You can have a hot fire with air coming in underneath, and all the oxygen coming in could be consumed by the fire, and you can put fresh fuel on top. And if you don't have a second source of oxygen, you're effectively just heating the fresh fuel, and there's no oxygen to combine with the volatile gases to combust. So this second source of air actually gives a second input of oxygen, so all these volatiles in the hot environment have something to combine with and combust. And the Hotpod turned out to be 81% efficient, which is incredibly efficient, and is an accident.